Chinese female tourist was scuba diving for sightseeing in Indonesia, but in a moment of carelessness, her expensive camera slipped from her hands and fell. She immediately dived down to retrieve it. However, before she could even catch her breath, a shark suddenly appeared right in front of her. Afterward, her body was recovered from nearly 100 meters deep on the seafloor. The underwater camera that was retrieved along with her also happened to capture the entire sequence of her final moments. This is the story we are covering in this episode: a diving accident on Indonesia's Cakaban Island. Cakaban Island is located in East Kalimantan Province, Indonesia, and is part of the Derawan Islands. The island covers an area of 7.7 square kilometers. In the local language, Cakaban means to embrace. This meaning can also be seen from satellite images. On the upper side of the island lies a lake surrounded by mangroves. The lake is about 17 meters deep and sits slightly above sea level. The waters here are calm, and the lake is home to thousands of non-stinging jellyfish. But on the opposite side, at a place known as Barracuda Point, the environment is the complete opposite, wild and extreme. This is an offshore drop-off that plunges to depths of over 100 meters, with a steep seabed and powerful currents. Upwellings and downwellings frequently bring nutrient-rich water toward the shallows, nourishing a vast variety of marine life, including coral reefs and large schools of fish. At the Karapa Dua dive site, the situation is shaped by a daily phenomenon. Every morning, cold upwellings rise from the deep ocean. This current attracts rare thresher sharks, which migrate from the deep sea into shallower waters. For diving enthusiasts, this is one of the few places in the world where such sharks can be observed. On May 1st, 2025, a 30-year-old Chinese tourist named Mary arrived in Indonesia with 12 other tourists and 3 dive guides. Mary, from Shanghai, held a DM certification. In recreational diving, DM stands for Dive Master. Although a dive master is not the same as an instructor, it represents a professional entry level in diving. Holding this certification means the diver is no longer just a recreational diver, but someone qualified to assist instructors, familiar with emergency procedures, and trained to understand underwater risks. However, sometimes this sense of professional experience can also influence risk judgment. On the first day of the trip, the group mainly conducted dives in calm areas such as Cakaban Island's Jellyfish Lake. On the morning of May 2nd, around 8 a.m., Mary and the other tourists arrived at the Karapa Dua dive site, hoping to catch a glimpse and possibly photograph the extremely rare thresher sharks. This was a standard recreational dive, and the group descended to around 30 meters, the typical depth limit for recreational diving, to observe marine life. Whether Mary successfully captured any footage of the thresher sharks remains unknown. As the scheduled time approached, the dive guide signaled the return, and the group began a controlled descent along the reef wall. By around 9 a.m., they had reached a depth of about 5 meters and began their 3-minute safety stop before surfacing. This is a standard procedure in recreational diving, designed to allow the body to gradually adjust to pressure changes and reduce the risk of decompression sickness. But during this safety stop, an unexpected incident occurred. Mary's expensive camera slipped from her hands and sank into the deep blue below. Whether it was the value of the equipment or the footage she had captured, something drove her to act. In a moment of urgency, she immediately descended to retrieve it, and the dive guide followed her down. At around 25 meters, they managed to recover the camera. But before they could relax, it slipped from her grasp again and continued to fall deeper. As the guide accompanied Mary on a second descent, a thresher shark suddenly appeared. At that moment, Mary seemed captivated by the sight, while the guide's air supply was already running critically low. After a brief exchange, the guide decided to ascend alone. Mary was never seen again. The divers at the surface quickly realized something was wrong and immediately called the authorities. In the meantime, 3 dive guides led local divers back into the water to conduct an initial search, but no sign of Mary was found. By 11 a.m., the Coast Guard had arrived. Multiple rescue vessels gathered on the surface, and the entire area was sealed off. A joint search team, composed of police officers, volunteers, and local divers, began a systematic sweep of the region. However, Barracuda Point is a steep underwater drop-off with great depth and extremely strong currents, making the search extremely difficult. No trace of the missing diver was found that day. On May 3rd, the search operation continued. The plan included 1. Conducting underwater searches near the incident site, 2. Deploying 5 speedboats for surface scanning, 3. Dispatching an aircraft to look for any possible signs from above. Given the unusually strong currents in the area, there was still a small hope that she might have been carried elsewhere by the flow and drifted to a different part of the sea. But after hours of searching, the truth everyone feared eventually came. That morning, the rescue team spotted Mary lying motionless on a deep underwater ledge at a depth of over 80 meters. This depth was far beyond the limits of recreational divers. Without specialized technical diving equipment, no one dared attempt a recovery. Until 2:55 p.m. that day, 31 hours after the incident, a professional rescue team finally recovered Mary's body at a depth of 87 meters. Her remains were then transported to a hospital for autopsy, where the preliminary cause of death was determined to be drowning. On May 6th, the victim's family arrived in Indonesia to take custody of her body. Mary's camera was also recovered and handed over to her family by the police. However, it did not contain any footage or key details of her final moments. With no clear evidence available, the exact circumstances of how Mary died remain unknown and unverified. But what can be stated with certainty is that she most likely did not descend to 87 meters on her own. All recreational diving organizations set 40 meters as the absolute depth limit. At depths approaching this range, high-pressure nitrogen begins to significantly impair brain function, leading to a state known as nitrogen narcosis, where divers may feel and behave as if intoxicated. At the same time, the no decompression limits become extremely short. A slight miscalculation during ascent can result in severe decompression sickness once returning to the surface. Even in the best physical condition, or under unusually favorable circumstances, divers cannot safely survive beyond the maximum operational depth of around 50 to 60 meters. Beyond this threshold, the oxygen a diver depends on can itself become toxic. At depth, elevated partial pressures may trigger central nervous system oxygen toxicity, a condition that can cause sudden convulsions underwater. Once this happens, the outcome is almost always drowning. In other words, no matter how strong or experienced a diver may be, the underwater environment itself becomes unforgiving. A brief delay or a single involuntary reaction can be enough to turn fatal. Therefore, the most plausible scenario is that, at the time, she was at a relatively shallow depth of 30 to 40 meters when she was likely caught in a powerful down current. She was swept downward into deeper waters, and during this descent, combined with factors such as air depletion, nitrogen narcosis, and possible oxygen toxicity, she ultimately ended up at a depth of 87 meters, where she lost her life. Although diving incidents occur every year and the specific causes vary, a review of most tragedies shows that human error remains the primary factor. First, Mary had already completed her dive and had not returned to the surface for proper rest when she immediately attempted a second deep descent. This significantly increased the risk of decompression sickness and nitrogen narcosis. Second, she was in an unfamiliar dive site without a proper dive buddy system or close supervision from a guide, leaving her isolated when trouble began. Third, her remaining gas supply was insufficient to handle any emergency situation. Once she was caught in a strong current, her air would have been rapidly depleted. Ultimately, the powerful current may have carried her deeper, where extreme pressure triggered fatal physiological responses such as nitrogen narcosis and oxygen toxicity, completely eliminating any chance of self-rescue. While recreational scuba diving is often considered far safer than high-risk activities like cave diving, this perception of safety can sometimes create complacency. And it is precisely this sense of false security that leads many divers to underestimate the risks, resulting in accidents that continue to happen far too often.